Hello, welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Now today is the second episode 2 of the two-parter on the cost of being a CISO, or CISO Dilemmas. Last time we went over some of the more frightening aspects of being a CISO, some of the less positive stuff. Now we're going to go through some of the other items about being a CISO, hopefully stray upon more on the positive side of things. What's it like? How do you do it? What things, tips and tricks of the trade? What you got to watch out for? Come with me on this journey again. We've already done it once. Let's finish it off with episode 2. Without further ado, let's pull in the guests. And back again to talk about the cost of being a CISO, or CISO dilemmas, or however you want to kind of discuss it. All things that are CISO. I have two of the most wonderful co-hosts at this point because they've done so many videos with me, Oliver and Richard. Oliver, do you want to kind of tell the guys quickly who you are? They should really know by now because these videos with you guys get so many views, but go for it.
Yeah, if a former industry analyst, used to work for Gartner doing security operations topics. One of the co-namers of SOAR. I have my own newsletter called Curious AI, where I look at it from I would say, a very skeptical point of view. I would say I'm more on the realist side of that debate. And I work with a company called Auguria, with my own advisory firm, where we're doing, AI, cybersecurity operations stuff as well.
Fantastic. And Richard?
Yeah, g'day. Good to be back with both of you. Richard, I am a near CISO for a multi-billion-dollar cyber resilience company. And so I get to travel around meeting fellow CISOs and talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's me in a nutshell.
You talk about me.
Most of the time, Oliver. Yeah, it is what it is.
So, in the first sort of part of this thing, we went through a number of things that are usually quite tough about being a CISO. What I really want to do for this video is kind of maybe start off on a lot of the really positive stuff about being a CISO. And it was kind of born out of a question I had from somebody probably about a week or two ago, where they kind of, I won't say who it was, but they looked at me and they sort of said, so we've never had a CISO before quite like you, because I'd gone in to have a chat with them about becoming their CISO. And they said to me, what is your idea of the remit of a CISO? Now, I know how I answer that. I'm actually quite interested to hear how, for a start, sorry, I'm going to bypass you here for a second, Oliver, but how Richard would answer that question, because you're, the CISO of who you are at the moment. When central management or top-end management C-suite executives ask you that question, what's your remit? What's your goals? How do you answer that?
I mean, I guess there's different answers for different people in the organization, because I'm seen very differently depending on who I'm talking to. Legal do tend to see my role as a thorn in their side for various reasons. But the board often see, someone like me as an Oliver Twist, please board, can I have some more? And everything in between. But I think the way that I try to position what I'm doing to the business, and what I kind of discuss when I talk to other CISOs, what do you think your role is? And I try to say to the companies I'm working with, look, my role is to help ensure that we remain in line with industry regulation and serve the business needs in a multitude of ways. And you can look at it, in many different aspects, but one is the kind of breach scenario. And I kind of say, like, every time we help manage a breach, because this word stopping breaches is, as we all agree, is no longer the right way to look at things. My role, along with the team, is to help save the business from potential chaos, to both our customers and to the users of our corporate assets, from not just chaos but from a nightmare, and kind of create a legacy that's worth building and that everybody invested in from a culture perspective, and that's kind of what I try to just instill and distill as I manage both the external part of my CISO role and the internal. And so, yeah, it's a great question, but it does really change based upon who you're talking to in the business. You have to know your audience. You have to know who you're going to go to battle with. And I would say there's not as many battles as there used to be. The CISO role has evolved, and we are seeing it becoming much more strategic than it ever has been. And that's a good thing, right? That's a reflection on industry understanding that in this line of work, CISOs don't get a standing ovation when we've enabled the regulator to walk away, bags packed and very happy, when we've managed to mitigate the breach of the attack in the best way possible. We don't get a pat on the back when that happens. We only tend to get noticed when everything goes wrong in most cases, and by then, we're already on the chopping block. But actually, I look at it positively. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and it is about trying to build that culture and awareness and changing the narrative based upon the stakeholders I'm talking to. So, in a nutshell, that's how I see my role and the role of a CISO.
Fantastic. And Oliver, you've spoken to more CISOs than most of us probably care to count. What are your views on that same question from your perspective?
Over the years, I think there's definitely been a change in the type of profile of the person who's leading cybersecurity, from someone who was very engineering focused to somebody now who has such a large remit. I mean, just thinking about, while you were talking, I was just thinking about the fact that when I was an industry analyst, we had a group of analysts to support CISOs. And it dawned on me the fact that the average CISO has to have such a large amount of skills and expertise now, from selecting a technology right up to basically speaking to the board, that I think it's a much more challenging job on the one hand if you were an engineer. And I think the profile has changed to someone who now is far more a relationship manager, someone who's a communicator, and someone who's able to manage a large team of experts, because that's the pertinent point. It's not the same as managing a team of factory workers where you delegate downwards. This is the other way around. Information is being delegated upward to you as a decision maker. And I think in that regard, that's something which is more common now in large enterprises, in American companies, in UK companies. I think it's something which is still a little bit rarer when you go out maybe to Europe, where it's still very much a engineering-driven, function. Yeah.
I definitely see a big serious change. Before I go into that, I think one of the things that I see a lot of, we provide virtual CISO for a number of different organizations in a number of different areas and number of different sectors of business. And whilst there's a lot of similarities between that role within those organizations, there's also quite a significant difference. Sometimes it's cultural because it's, different location, but quite often it's also down to the sector as well. I mean, I sort of ran security at one point for a well-known publication with a lot of journalists, and the way that we treated security there was eminently different from the way that you treat security in other organizations, and your tactics change as well.
Oliver's right. The vast set of skill sets are really quite impressive if you think about it. And I want to touch on the kind of common themes that I've seen, because as preparing for this kind of podcast, I did think about this question. What if I were to speak to somebody that was trying to get into the CISO world, having been in it and been working with CISOs for a while, what would be the top kind of skill sets that I think a CISO needs, and that I've heard from other business leaders? And first thing I think most critical is the strategic thinking and business acumen side to what we do, right? You've got to think beyond the technical realm. And Oliver's right. You have to be technically astute. You need to know enough not to have the wool pulled over your eyes, as it were. But I don't think you need to know everything. In fact, that's the antithesis of management. You need to know enough to understand if your teams are being effective or if they aren't. And so, think beyond the technical realm and align cybersecurity strategies with your business objectives. And what does that mean? Well, it means understanding your core business and risk appetite, or what some CISOs refer to as risk tolerance. And please think, in long-term goals. I know we had a chat about long-term on a few podcasts ago. Is it 3 years? Is it 5? Is it very greater than that? A lot of that's down to industry and technology. But you've got to have that strategic thinking and business acumen. And then, clearly the next point is effective communication and storytelling. The amount of times, if I've gone back to boards and I've been at an hour at the table where I try to talk about the funding we need from a regulatory line perspective to mature certain operations, if I just go in with facts and figures, it doesn't tend to resonate as well as if I can tell a story around what's important here. And you kind of have to be a salesperson to a large extent because you sell the outcome, never the product. And so I try to talk about the outcome. I sell the story around the outcome and translate that tech jargon into kind of business impact. So that storytelling nature of what CISOs do is really important. And I don't know if many that I've met have got that really well, sort of oiled and tested. And then, yes, risk management governance. Okay, I say okay as if it's flippant. It's a real core part. CISOs aren't just responsible for technology, but they're managing risk holistically across an entire organization. So you have to understand regulatory compliance. As much of it as the bane of our lives it will be, you've got to understand how to risk assess those regulations and how to implement the governance frameworks, minimize exposure. And I think, there's a former White House member said that risk management isn't just a process; it's a lens through which you protect the future of your business. And I think if you keep that mindset, you're not going to kind of veer too far off the strategic rails. And then a couple of sort of final ones. I said don't be overly technical, but be technically proficient and with a focus on emerging technologies, because the CISO is becoming far more strategic. I think historically it was seen as very tactical, right? There's a security technical person who understands business. Let's throw stuff at them. While CISOs do need a decent technical foundation, I think, and especially in emerging technologies and things like cloud security, AI, and zero trust, and all the iterations that will become, it just makes sure that we make informed decisions and we lead the teams effectively. And then the lesser kind of probably accepted ones, but I was sat with the CISO of University College London just yesterday, and she's ex-Gartner as well, actually. And
all great people are. All great people are.
All great people are, indeed.
Oh, wow.
Indeed.
I remember that one.
Do you know, it's funny though, when I sat in front of her, I was like, oh my goodness, you're ex-Gartner, 3.5 years. So like, and there's a level of like, oh, I've got to be careful what I say because she's heard it all before and now she's a CISO. But she said one of the biggest lessons she learned being a CISO was the incident response and crisis management side of her role, and being prepared to handle the crisis efficiently. And she got the scars. She'd been at previous customers that got hit by ransomware and ceased operations at one of the businesses she was with. She says, look, worst experience of my career, but probably the best as well, not to contradict herself, because it made her understand the importance of incident response and crisis management at an intrinsic level, not just, by the textbook. And then the last point, and James, you raised it, is legal and regulatory knowledge. Oh my days. And here's one thing I learned in my role as EMEA CISO with the company that I'm currently at is, it's just EMEA. So all I need to be aware of is all the EMEA regulations and directives. And that's just not the case. Becoming very afraid with SEC, cybersecurity disclosure mandates, and all these other bits, to avoid additional fines to the business because we're a global business, was a steep learning curve. So, be global in your appreciation and awareness of legal and regulatory knowledge. So I'd say they're kind of the core things that I've taken away from the role of CISO, but it'd be interesting to see what Oliver thinks from his travels.
I completely agree with you, Richard. I think you make a really valid point. I think a good CISO is a generalist technologist. But at the same time, if you think Europe has a lot of bureaucracy, don't become a CISO. It's not the type of job where you can just do the things you like or that are interesting. In reality, a lot of it is to do with paperwork, to do with policies. You need to, I think, understand the necessity of that. And you need to be able to balance that as well. I also think it's hard to say, like, at which point does a head of security become a CISO? Because obviously in a smaller company, you're not really a CISO. You're hands-on, you're probably very tactical rather than strategic. You're probably still going to be having a very hands-on hat on. At which point does that transition occur? Or is it a gradual thing? because as you were talking, I was thinking about that. What makes a CISO? At which point does a company need someone who's actually strategically involved from a security perspective?
The barrier for entry on that one's getting smaller and smaller and earlier and earlier. I mean, it used to be a CISO was a function within just large organizations. That's now migrated to the more mid-sized organizations. It hasn't quite got down to the small yet. But one thing I have noticed, and it's something that both of you have mentioned, I think one of the key strategic disciplines that you should really learn is also leadership. Reason being, you can't do all of this, and you both just mentioned that. It's like I know people who've gone and done university degrees in law who have specialized in the law of cybersecurity, various different jurisdictions, various different requirements and legislations. Now, the CISO used to be the catch-all, and like I in preparation to this, I went back and looked at a number of CISO kind of roles that I'd done. And then I started looking at some of the job specs out on kind of LinkedIn jobs and all the rest of it, of what people were looking for in a CISO now. And holy Christ, it's like a novel with a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different things you need to know, especially if you're going into banking with the kind of like three levels of defense you tend to see in that kind of environment as well. And, the CISO doesn't necessarily fit in level 2 where people try to post them, because they've got to have interaction at the front level. They've got to have interaction with what's going on at the coalface, because if you don't, as Rich pointed out, and you confirmed as well, Oliver, you can get screwed over. And one of the disciplines when I mentor new CISOs getting into that role from wherever they've come from before, and it is normally technical, there's a few sort of more governance people there, but it's normally technical, is, learn incident response and war game incident response situations. Don't just do the technical ones, because everybody always does bloody ransomware or phishing and all the rest of it. They're good ones to do, but also do some serious ones where, it's more the governance aspect has failed or something has happened that's really screwed over the company at that level. Don't just focus on the technical. It's interesting, and I'll be interested to see, because, with this new legislation like DORA, like NIS and so on and so forth, we're going to see more and more and more. And I know there's quite it's all gone a bit funny in the US at the moment with everything that's happened there recently, but they were going down quite a significant trajectory on cybersecurity. And weirdly enough, the person who won, I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad, I'm not getting involved in politics, clearly stated he would use cyber warfare tactics if needed to take down cartels, criminal and drug cartels. So that there's a lot of seriousness being taken over there in that corner of the world as well. And of course, you've got what's going on with the SEC and the SolarWinds CISO. You've got all these other kind of things. And I was watching a podcast, obviously not as good as us. I know it's a good podcast, but not as good as us. And they were saying that it's becoming more and more important now for CISOs to get, when you do your risk management, CISOs don't accept risk anymore. We shouldn't do, some still try to do for some bizarre reason. But they should get that sign off that we used to get. You remember way back, Richard, when somebody would say, "Oh, I don't see that as a risk," and you're like, "Okay, send me an email just to tell me that you're not going to do anything about this, and we'll say no more about it, and it'll go on a risk register somewhere." That's apparently becoming so important now, because if it all goes horribly wrong, you could be up on, when DORA's in, on charges because you didn't do your job properly, because no one's going to want to lose their job. So the role of CISO is definitely changing, and I do believe it's going to the point where the reason why I think leadership is quite important is because you can't do it all yourself. You guys said the same thing. Cybersecurity and the way you handle cybersecurity is different from how you deliver governance. Obviously, they're different disciplines. They require different knowledge. And whilst I can still build and audit a mean firewall rule set, no problems, I don't know the technology anymore like I used to. I mean, you're talking to somebody who had an MCSE in NT4, for Christ's sake. That's how long I've been in it. But I don't know how to deal with all of this tech. I was in it with cloud, but now I'm completely kind of I'm getting to the point where I'm great with the cybersecurity architecture and designing that kind of stuff, but the coalface stuff, how to deal with some of the IDS, IPS products that are out there on the market and endpoint, is getting more and more difficult to keep up. What do you think?
Well, whilst Oliver's thinking about that, there is an elephant in the room, that you have to talk about in the role of CISO.
Go on.
And there's two sides to the fence: ethical decision making and integrity. Now, you think there was a slam dunk answer? Oh yeah, the slam dunk. We always have to, toe the corporate line, toe the regulatory line, but there are grey areas. And CISOs often do face ethical dilemmas. And I've been in conversations where there have been significant ethical dilemmas. I'll give you some examples in a moment. And whether to disclose the vulnerability or whether could we paint a different picture of this vulnerability? Is it a vulnerability? Is it something else? How do we balance transparency with business interest, which is a horrible phrase. And in fact, there was a survey last year done by ISACA, and I'd love to see what if they've repeated it this year, but 52% of CISOs reported from this cohort that they had asked that they've faced situations where they felt pressured to compromise ethical standards for business interests. And so, in cybersecurity, right, the hardest decisions aren't technical, they're ethical. Bruce Schneier said that, a well-known security technologist. So, and I've not yet faced that, thank goodness, touch wood. For me, it's easier when there's things that perhaps we need to do better and not align to, and so on and so forth. But we all learned the lesson from the CISO of Uber. That was a big example of when you kind of get it wrong, and we know Joe Sullivan. It's just what that highlighted was just the precarious nature of the decisions he had to make at the time. And he was convicted, as we know, for covering up a breach, right? And by paying hackers to keep quiet. And of course, it's obvious to most people listening to this podcast, don't do that. But there are going to be scenarios where you've kind of got to balance this really dodgy, precarious line between. And it's just, let's put it out there, but it's a tough conversation, but it's a core part of a CISO's role, because we're going to see a lot of this stuff firsthand. We're going to be asked.
It does tie back to what Jim said, because I was just reading an article the other day about Tim Brown, SolarWinds CISO, and he said it's hard to follow rules when there aren't any. And that's a part of the problem, right? At the same time, of course, like if you think about, we talk about the CISO role, but a large degree of your role depends on who you're working for, their attitude towards security, what maturity you inherit, and what your job is with that maturity. Because the worst case scenario is you inherit a low maturity and it's your job to make it look good. Best case scenario, you get a great maturity, but most people get a low maturity they're supposed to improve. And your job in the meantime is to provide air cover for the company to operate as risk-free as they can. Your ethical choices shouldn't be great because they should be regulated. There should be a legal framework for you to rely on to make those ethical choices. But here's the thing, the moment you have a seat at the table, you have shares in the company, you're an officer, you have a financial interest in covering it up, it becomes an ethical thing. It's not about the investors just, because you profit from it too. And I think that's what changes when you're with a large public company and you're an officer of the company with equity and so on. At that point, you're not making an ethical decision that's personal. It's a financially ethical decision as well.
Oh, I have been in that position a fair few times, I'll be honest, in my previous life before starting Razorthorn. And it's never a fun place to be, because, when you're faced with ethical decisions that you're being ordered to facilitate, decision-making in a one direction that benefits the company, but might not necessarily be something that is right, either ethically with your own ethics and morals, or borderline if other institutions find out, there's going to be legal ramifications, contractual or actual, kind of potentially criminal, especially with things like DORA coming in. It's a tough one. It's a real tough one. And you know what? This is why I like when we do virtual CISOing here, we're not on the board. We're brought in order to advise, and that's where I see that CISO position is, and that's how you protect yourself from that as a CISO. You're not making the decisions. It's like risk management. You're identifying the risks, you're analyzing the risks, you're communicating what those risks are, and if you've got any sense, you're also going to come to them with options on how to deal with that. And when you are faced with ethical positioning of what do we do? We've got shareholders that we've got to keep happy, and they won't want this information out. But then, you can see there being potentially, incidents that could include, I don't know, people's livelihoods, people's health, if you're working in some institutions. Do you toe that corporate line and stay quiet, or do you stand up? Now, I don't like being in that position, and I've always tried to stay in that advisory role and say, look, this is not a decision I'm prepared to make. All I'm going to do is identify you that there is an ethical issue here. I suggest you go to your legal counsel and let them provide you with a further advisory on how to handle this one, because you really ought to speak to those people. And I'll be there to support you, whether there's fallout or whether there isn't. And I will try to create some kind of scenario to reduce the damage. But I can't make that decision. I can't be a part of that ethical debate. It's a tough one. It really, really is. I hate it. I hate it when I'm in that position.
Yeah, but I have to play devil's advocate there as well, because the assumption, of course, is that covering it up is good for the investors or the shareholders. But in reality, it might not be. It might actually not be in the interest of the shareholders at all.
No.
To not to have bad security in the company. That's the ethical dilemma of that's what I mean. That's what I mean with seeming to profit. There's an element where the executive team can actually profit from it despite the shareholders not profiting from it. And that's where you have a real ethical problem, right?
The difficulty there is you've got to have some kind of route to speak to the shareholders, and that's really carefully gate-kept. And I think, in essence, that's kind of where we're going with it. And I keep using SolarWinds, but we've used Uber situation as well. And going to the wider thing, I think the problem there is CISOs are potentially in that position. We don't want it told that we've lost 3 million people's medical records.
Yeah.
Legally speaking, we're in a really shit area because we've had this theft. Now, we have to, obviously, in the UK, we have to, let various different institutions know. Depending upon where in the world, you'll have to tell other institutions as well. And you have a moral, requirement. But, you're being paid by the people who are telling you, for instance, don't go to the shareholders and tell us we've gone and lost a load of this data. It'll make our shares tank. There's plenty of times in history where and I'm going to be very careful what I say here, where security incidents have occurred. They've obviously been known about for a little while because you suddenly see a big furor of major shareholders who may or may not be the CEO and the chief financial officer and various other people at the C-suite dropping their shares like it's going out of style, because they know that when that hits the media, not only are they going to be in for some nice regulatory fining, but they're going to get crapped on a share price basis. Or am I too cynical?
Listen, but that is not an ethical conundrum. The ethics there are very clear. They're not confusing.
But this is it. Okay, so let's go back to it. So ethically speaking, something has happened. Let's just say it's something that isn't really, really bad, but it comes down to, will the shareholders like it or not like it? How are you going to get that communication to them? Because the moment you start trying to talk directly with them, you're going to get sideswiped by the rest of the C-suite or elements of the rest of the C-suite. They're not going to like it.
But the other question is like hypothetically. It was hypothetical, but that's a terrible situation to be in. At which point, I guess I would probably leave the job, because it's easier than putting yourself into personal liability. You'd have to have a real mission complex to tell the shareholders. But you're right. But it is being in that position, isn't it, where basically you have this privileged insider information, and it can have a material impact on a larger circle of parties.
I like to give you some examples of ethical dilemmas and models that I've seen. I'm not going to name companies. I'm just going to use some examples because I really want people to kind of get what we really mean by this, because it's a big subject. So I think the key one we all know about is disclosure of a data breach, right? You get the ethical perspective, which says, we've got an ethical and legal obligation to disclose these breaches, right, to the affected parties and the authorities within a specific time frame. But then there's the moral dilemma of the CISO, and I've had this conversation many a time. They feel that, well, if I disclose this breach immediately right now, is that the right thing to do to protect our customers, even if it means damaging the company's reputation? And most CISOs will say, yes, it is. I don't care. I shouldn't care about the company's reputation. I should care about the customers. And if we lose clients, it's all about being honest. But the conflict is the business may not agree with that. And they may want some time to mitigate the business impact, even if it means the user's data remains at risk for longer. And that's a common, almost week, month-to-month example. Another one, right? When you kind of get to this, hacking back is something I've seen a lot. So look, many countries have laws about retaliating against cyber attackers, the hack back scenario. But I have seen scenarios where the attacks have been so devastating, ransomware is a good example, that some cybersecurity professionals the cybersecurity professionals have felt morally justified in taking offensive action. So we've had some great threat hunters, some great cybersecurity professionals in the team that have gone, no, screw this, I'm going to go back. And even not with permission from the security leadership. And they've come back with some really good results. And so therefore, as a CISO, I've seen CISOs in a position where they've been able to recover data, prevent further harm. And you can argue that's going to stir up the hornet's nest. But, it's not legal. It's not ethical, although the morals of the person in your team decided it was something they should do. But what would you do with that data as a CISO? If it's going to impact positively your ability to recover, what would you do? And then you've got the whole surveillance and privacy monitoring thing. HR knocking on the door and saying, yeah, we think Richard is leaving and he's doing this, that, the other. Can you just do some extra inspection? Which is not written into the IT policy, which is a little bit beyond the realms of, what we should be allowed to do. And I've seen this happen. As a CISO, I feel very uncomfortable with that, increasing surveillance on people without justifiable means to do so or being allowed to under regulatory examples. But the conflict is that, there could be a risk to the business. It could be a risk to my role. And maybe I would want to consider that. And I'm not saying I would. I've seen some that have, but they're just some day-to-day examples of what CISOs face when I talk about ethics versus morals in a business context.
Yes.
It's food for thought. It's a real tricky scenario. There is no right answer, but sometimes there's a gray area. And unfortunately, we don't talk about it enough, but it is out there. It does happen.
Yeah. But do you think with things like DORA, where there's now going to be clear ramifications if you don't, that it's going to become more...
example, James.
Yeah.
It's just sorry to cut across you. Executives can be legally liable to custodial sentences in certain areas. So what do you think, genuinely, hand on heart, is going to happen when these cases occur, when the CEO or the board go, oh my God, I have totally messed up here. I didn't do this, and now it's led to a material breach of DORA. The very few's first thought would be, yeah, put the handcuffs on, I'm going to prison. They would probably do everything in their power to try to massage the data or the truth or the reality in a way that would mitigate their circumstances. And yes, there are ethical and moral concerns there. And I think DORA is going to push that ethical question pretty hard when some businesses come to face that potential custodial sentence. And it's a great example of where this ethics question is going to be a real challenge.
Huh.
You said a bleak scene there, sir. But you are right.
Yeah, we said we're going to talk about things more positive, which we should probably do now. But I had to bring up the ethics.
The example I have is that working in vulnerability management in that space for a long time with vulnerability research teams. When you're submitting vulnerabilities to a partner or a customer, oftentimes the CISOs get involved. I can tell you, based on an article I wrote that was negative about Adobe, the CISO at the time tried to get me fired at HP, honest.
Wow.
So there's things like that. I know when I was doing vulnerability research with a couple of vendors, if we submitted it to a customer, their CISO would basically speak to that CISO to try to say, oh, can you delay it or whatever? And so I think it's in the interest of a company, but of course, it's overreach to a certain degree. So, and having experienced that multiple times, not just once, I can't exactly say it's not necessarily that, that uncommon. Yeah.
That's an interesting scenario, when you've got another CISO coming after you, or when you have like a vulnerability that's being threatened to be put out into the wide world because you didn't pay them. There's a lot of that goes on as well. We found a vulnerability, pay us, or we'll tell the whole world about it. Do you disclose, or do you sort of pay them a bug bounty? Thank you very much for that. I don't like it when CISOs go at one another, and I've had situations in the past where I've come under fire from different information security professionals. It's not always been CISOs. And I always turn around to people and say, look, stop. Why? Why are you going down this path? What are you looking to achieve? We're all infosec people. We all have the same problems. We all have the same degrees of issues. We all know that sometimes you communicate risks that you're seeing to the business, to the people who decide that they're not going to take action on it, or they just haven't got the budget to do it. It's not in our remit to force that issue. We're there to just identify and advise. And now you and hypothetical infosec professional coming to me and threatening me to do something is, can't we just work together on working out how to make this right? How can we do this the right way? It's like, there's more than enough aggravation that infosec people face on the daily kind of work that they do, that we don't need to be at each other's necks. And I had a scenario very similar, very recently, where there was two infosec professionals. At odds, I may have been one of them, and I pointed that out. I said, look, I'm just happy that I've got another infosec professional in the room. So let's deal with this. Let's not screw one another over now. Come on. We're both working for the same customer. Obviously, ego screws that over somewhat, and that's why one of the things I say when you become a CISO, try to get rid of that ego, because it's not going to help you going down the line. It's not a good thing to be a CISO with a big ego. Be confident. That's different. Don't have a massive ego, and don't go chucking it around like it's a weapon, because you're only going to get burnt horribly.
You see, but I do agree with I do agree with the community, but at the same time, at the end of the day, if you are an executive team and you have a business unit, you also have to have a bit of teeth. You're gonna be competing with these other executives. Part of that, I think, is a problem that we haven't necessarily always had the most politically versed people in that position. But to be able to move something within a larger company, you need political clout.
But I mean, I get that, but compete, that's the word there that I'm a bit not dubious about. That's the one that I question, because it's like, I always pride myself when I come to the table with something of being technically correct. I learned that from Futurama. The best form of correct is technically correct. If you're technically correct, nobody can feasibly fault you. Okay, you might be wrong because of misinformation that you've digested information wrongly and all the rest of it. I hate the word misinformation. It's so annoying. But, it does happen. But I don't compete with people. And if people try to compete with me, I say, look, I'm not doing this. It's like, I'm telling you what the facts are. What we do about it is very varied and different. And that's when, you sit down and do do what you need to do. And politically speaking, I'm always very, very polite if I have to, as a general rule. There are a few things that really wind me up and get a reaction out of me, but I'm not going to tell a podcast what that is, because then I'll get it all the time.
So look, I guess whilst being a CISO certainly comes with some high stakes and intense challenges, and the ethics are a part of that, there are some very rewarding and fulfilling aspects of the role.
Being technically correct.
Exactly. Technically speaking, James. I think one of the things I've learned in the role I'm in is that I genuinely get to make a tangible difference to my organization's security and resilience. Okay, and I'm in a unique position to do that. And I do take pride in helping as part of a team, because it's never ever me, never fail alone and always win as a team, right? Mantra everybody should live by. But I get thrill out of protecting the livelihoods of my own data, my colleagues, the trust of our customers, and that ultimately leads to survival of the company. So that's a great thing. The other thing, which is more kind of the gamified side of it, which is for me is the thrill of the constantly evolving and challenging landscapes we operate in, and the learning that brings with it. So and I thrive on learning. I think most of us do. And that the cybersecurity landscape is one of the most dynamic environments you could ever work in, I believe, from my experience. And so, new tech, new threat vectors, new strategies to master, that constant change does keep me excited, and ensures I'm always learning something new. And then the other point I'd like to talk about is, well, it's kind of two in one. One is the leadership and influence at the highest levels of business, and then the mentorship opportunities that brings to build what I hope to be high performing teams. So I do have a seat at the executive table, and I get to give them the opportunity, giving me the opportunity to work with them to influence strategic decisions. And, and that's great, because I get to be shaping the future of the organization. I love building things, right? So, unlike many roles, to be fair, a CISO's input is super critical to protecting the business, whether the business realizes or likes that or not. So it makes you one of the most influential positions in the business. And that mentorship part, the bit I'll end here on, I love that. I love getting to mentor the next generation coming through, the ranks of cybersecurity professionals, of risk management professionals, and everything in between. And I get pleasure at building a strong team and learning from them. Oh my goodness, to your point on ego, drop it at the door. It's not useful. I've been wrong, and I'm happy to say I've been wrong, and I've been shown that by my team members. So CISOs don't have all the answers. You shouldn't know all the answers, and if you think you do, you're in the wrong job.
Absolutely, and this is the reason why you and I think get on so well. We have very, very similar views, Rich, especially when it comes to things like the next generation of infosec people. We have so few fully trained infosec people these days. We the whole lockdowns, the COVID, the up and coming people through university, it got stuttered and stopped for quite a while. And as I've said many times before, during that period, there were so many CISOs who were getting on a bit. Let's be honest. We all have a time where we want to kind of retire. And finding that sitting in the garden and watching the butterflies and the bees wander around over a summer kind of lets you have some thinking time, because you're not being shouted at across a boardroom about what you have or you haven't done, or whether somebody sees something as a risk. And so a lot of them at the time kind of decided that was it. That was their time to leave, and it left such a big hole that we just don't have those professionals. I mean, I employ people all the time in this role. Be it consultants, be it penetration testers, be it developers for Razor's Edge and all the rest of it. And I am having such a hard time finding really well-trained staff because of that time period where it all just sunk and nobody got trained. Nobody learned anything other than what they were learning through the podcast. And indeed, this is why this podcast exists. Originally, it was to train the up-and-coming people, because I didn't have anything else to do whilst I was locked down. And then it turned into this. But no, I'm with you on this one. And the fact that InfoSec now is such a varied and wide profession compared to what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago. As we mentioned before, you can get into it from the legal perspective, and you get a really good job just dealing with the legal aspects of a multinational like the one that you work for, Richard. Because, as you said, you can't know it all. You have to really dedicate a lot of your time to understanding legislation to know it all. And if you're doing that, you're not doing the rest of the role of the CISO. So you've got to bring in teams of people to be able to help you with that. The cyber professionals who's, are more cyber related. The policy and procedural professionals who can get that policy and procedure up to speed and maintain it. Gone are the days where you can do it all on your own, really, as a CISO now, unless you're working for the smaller companies. If you're working for anybody of any decent size, you have to rely on a team. I have to at Razorthorn. I've got quite a few consultants and pen testers. I don't know what they all do. I know what they all do, but I don't have the same disciplines, and I've specifically picked people who've got disciplines I don't have, because I can't know it all anymore. I can't be that jack of all trades. Jesus, it's too bleeding wide for that.
We also shouldn't pretend that being an infosec leader is any harder than being a leader anywhere else. Everyone has constraints, things they have to do, ethical conundrums that they face. It's just, I think security is pretty unique because nowhere else do they let essentially civilians loose on hardened criminals and nation state spies. We're unique in that regard, that we're engineers who basically get to face that on a regular basis from the comfort of behind the screen. And I think that does give it a unique coloring of our role. But that sometimes get lost in the tactical. We have to remind ourselves sometimes when you're bogged down in compliance standards that there's a bigger mission here.
You're painting us now like a bunch of hackers with matrix code coming down, and we're actively hacking back and trying to protect the organization on a fly.
Yeah,
which sounds really cool, and that's what happens all the time, guys. Watch Hackers. That's how it is.
I also have roller skates all around the house.
I don't doubt it, Oliver. I don't doubt that.
and neon lights. Good man.
Neon light.
We're in our final kind of hour now. Final hour. We're not doing it for another hour. I think we've covered quite a few pertinent points, and we're all busy people, and we all need to move on. So, what are your final thoughts? I mean, obviously, we've covered all the tough points of being a CISO. We've covered all as many good points as we can being a CISO. What are your final points on where you think that role is going to be in, say, another 5 years? It's still in flux. We're still seeing a little bit of change and a little bit of kind of unsurety of where things are going to really rest. I'm not even going to mention AI. That's for another conversation between us all. I'm sure we've got a few of those lined up. Where do you think that role is going to be in 5 years' time? What's going to be the standard that you're thinking it's going down, judging the trajectory on where you're seeing things at the moment through all this change and legislative change, social change, cultural change, and business change?
I hope CISOs get paid more.
I think we all...
Yeah.
Let's move away from the monetary values.
That's got to be the first point. Pay more, please.
Richard wants a pay rise.
Yeah, look, I'll give you a top 4 or 5. So, yeah, look, I think it's definitely poised to undergo significant transformation, as you said, right, over the next 5 years. And they are, one is the shift toward ethical leadership. I know we talked about it, but we will be expected to serve more and more as the ethical compass of our respective organizations. And that's especially with the advent of, generative AI, data analytics, the continued advent of automation, ethical implication of data is used. So that's going to be a big part. I don't see the personal accountability thing getting less. I think it's going to increase for CISOs. A trend of holding CISOs personally liable for breaches and regulatory missteps is unlikely to fade. I think you're going to see CISOs becoming more resilient. I know we talk a lot about burnout, but the next generation of CISOs will learn to be more resilient by design. One of the best courses I've ever taken in education was human factors, because you learn a lot about what makes your mind tick and what makes teams work together well and so on and so forth. And it kind of builds a resilience mindset. So the pressures to job aren't going away. And one of those skills, I think if you lead with empathy, you build strong security cultures, you prioritize the mental health of you and your team, you'll find yourselves thriving in the environment in your work. Embracing collaboration and transparency is a big term to say, but the days of operating silos are over, right? Not just your 4 walls anymore. There's multiple third parties and whatnot. So the future CISO will be a master collaborator, breaking down those barriers and trying to find the risks further afield outside of their own digital walls. And the last point is the cybersecurity as a business enabler, right? So perhaps most importantly, the role of a CISO will actually continue to shift from being seen traditionally as a cost center, right, a pain in the proverbial, to a critical business enabler in the next 5 years. So, and that's only a good thing.
Go on then, Oliver. You're the futurist here.
Yeah. I just looking at some of the kind of trends, I agree with Richard that regulatory compliance and standards are going to evolve. They're going to become more prevalent simply because the industry needs and wants them. I think they're ready for it because of the liability question. you now want to know whether you are within those parameters and what they are. I think in other regards, like, look, I think we are on the cusp of many technological revolutions. I'm not just talking AI. For me, it's more around automation and that kind of stuff, robotics, even energy. The amount of money being poured into nuclear energy in the moment means that that's going to be a catalyst for other things, right? And so I think actually CISOs are going to be, for the next 5 years, hard at work trying to keep up with that, just to keep their company on top of that, to try to anticipate what the company needs. I also think that the type of people who are going to be doing this are going to move towards more being process-oriented. If we talk about automation and AI, they're not going to be perfect, but we're going to be designing processes for those tools rather than using the tools to implement processes. And I think that's going to be a fundamental change as well, meaning that these teams are going to become far more focused on things like knowledge management and process design, ergonomical processes, especially SOC ergonomics, I think, and security ergonomics is something which we haven't even touched upon, which is going to be another trend because of burnout and churn. We're going to start taking that a little bit more serious because we can't replace the people. And lastly, it's going to be a hot zone. Look, no matter which way the politics goes, it doesn't matter which way you swing, we're not going to have a quiet time over the next 5 years. There's going to be an increase in crime. There's going to be an increase in nation-state activity. And CISOs in certain industries and areas, even further down the supply chain, it's another pressure point for them. I don't think any of these things are bad. This is our job. This is what we're here for. But it's worth keeping in mind that the biggest problem over the next years isn't necessarily just going to be the business side of this. It's going to be the business reacting to the threat environment and to technological shift.
Well, my final words, I know what I'm going to probably be seeing from a lot of CISOs in 5 years if all of that comes to fruition. Tiredness. A lot of people getting very tired. And insurance, you're going to have to be like a doctor. It's like, get your insurance just in case you give some bad advisory onto somebody. Just, it is a possibility. There you go, insurance companies out there. I've just given you a good idea. I'd like to have a good 2% of any deal that you do. So here we go. This is the final thing. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Richard, for a really, really good debate. It's always great to have you guys here. I think next time let's hit some AI. It's been mentioned a few times in this podcast and it's got me fired up. And I know that Richard's keen to talk about AI again. The video that we did recently with him has hit quite a good high level of numbers. And,
we're overdue. Come on.
yeah. I'll bring Oliver in as well. Let's get 4 of us in to debate it because I think it'd be good. But look, guys. Thank you ever so much for watching. If there is anything you want us to cover or you want us to cover in great depth or further depth, then please reach out. I try to read all the DMs. I get a lot. A lot of you don't like commenting on the videos, especially on YouTube and stuff. And I can kind of understand because, nobody necessarily who's an infosec professional in this small area wants to be quite so vocal in the big wide world about stuff. So that's fine. Just DM me. We'll be more than happy to kind of look at it and see if we can add this content. And I do think that we're going to be revisiting this kind of like CISO thing quite a few times over the next few years as things change. And I will try to bring back Oliver and Richard to help us update this particular debate. So thank you all again. Look after yourselves, and we'll speak to you all again soon. In addition, I do have a book recently come out, the Cyber Sentinels Handbook, a primer for information security professionals. Now, this book is very much geared up towards professionals at all levels of their career, be they starters, be they newcomers, be they people who've been in it for a little while and maybe looking for a little bit more direction, albeit the older ones looking to maybe reground themselves in some of the more important aspects of the trade that maybe they've forgotten over time. I've had lots of good feedback from a lot of different readers of lots of different levels, so please feel free to get yourselves a copy. We've got the e-copy, we've also got the paperback copy, and if you don't want to spend any money, you can go on Kindle Unlimited and read the book for free there as well. So thank you ever so much again.
look after yourselves, and we'll be seeing you again soon.